There is a moment, right before you check your phone, where you are not yourself. You don't decide to look. Your hand simply moves. A small, private surrender, repeated hundreds of times a day, so fast you've stopped noticing it happens at all. Somewhere, a stranger designed that moment, and they understood you better than you understood yourself. This is not a story about technology. It's a story about an ancient survival instinct, one that kept your ancestors alive for 200,000 years. And what happens when that instinct is switched on, over and over, by something that was never alive to begin with? By the end, you may never look at your phone the same way again. Long before screens, before cities, before written language, the human brain built itself around a single question: what's out there? A sound in the dark, a shadow at the edge of a fire, a silence that shouldn't be silent. The humans who paused, who checked, who stayed alert to the unknown. They were the ones who survived long enough to have children. The ones who didn't pause, didn't. That instinct is not a personality trait. It's a legacy. It runs in you right now, underneath thought, older than any memory you own. For most of human history, this instinct had nowhere to go but real danger. Then, in 1957, a man in a lab coat built a box. Inside it, a pigeon, a lever, and a small tray for food. B.F. Skinner wanted to understand reward, how behavior forms and why it sometimes refuses to die. So he changed one variable most people would never think to touch. Instead of feeding the pigeon every time it pressed the lever, he made the food arrive at random. Sometimes nothing. Sometimes food immediately. Sometimes after 12 empty presses, a sudden reward with no warning at all. The pigeons that could predict their reward pressed the lever occasionally, the way you might check the mail. The pigeons that couldn't predict it pressed the lever obsessively, thousands of times. Long after they were full. Long after the food stopped mattering, something about not knowing had taken hold of them more tightly than the food itself ever could. Skinner didn't know it yet, but he had just described the exact mechanism that would one day live inside a piece of glass in your pocket. For decades, this stayed a curiosity in psychology textbooks. A strange footnote about pigeons and levers. Then, in the 1990s, a neuroscientist named Wolfram Schultz began studying dopamine, not in pigeons this time, but in monkeys and eventually, in the architecture of the human brain itself. What he found unsettled the field. Dopamine, it turned out, was never really about pleasure. It was about prediction. The brain didn't reward you for receiving something good. It rewarded you for the uncertain moment just before, the not knowing stretched out aching to resolve. A guaranteed reward barely moved the needle. An uncertain one sent it soaring, which means the most addictive thing a human brain can experience isn't good news. It's the possibility of good news dangled just out of reach. Now hold that thought and walk into a casino. For over a decade, an anthropologist named Natasha Schüll studied the people who designed slot machines, not the gamblers, the designers. She expected to find engineers chasing bigger jackpots. Instead, she found something colder. The most profitable machines weren't built to make someone win. They were built to make someone disappear into a state the designers privately called the zone. A trance of continuous play, where winning stopped mattering and the rhythm of almost winning became the entire point. The machine wasn't selling money. It was selling the erasure of the question, what's out there? By answering it, over and over, just often enough to keep you asking. Schüll's research didn't stay in Las Vegas. It moved to Silicon Valley. App designers studied slot machine psychology deliberately, openly, in meetings you will never see the minutes of. And somewhere in one of those meetings, a gesture was born, the pull, to refresh. You drag the screen down. It resists, it bounces, new content loads. It is, mechanically, a lever. The engineer who helped build it later said, in public, that he regretted it. By then, over 1 billion hands were already pulling. Here is the part that should sit uncomfortably with you. Your ancestors checked the tree line because something might genuinely be there. A predator, a threat, a reason to run. The instinct existed because reality sometimes demanded it. Your phone has no tree line. There is no predator behind the notification, no tiger behind the red dot. And yet your nervous system cannot tell the difference. It still floods you with the same ancient urgency. The same low hum that once meant survive this, now firing for absolutely nothing. You are not weak for feeling this pull. You are ancient. The mechanism inside you is functioning exactly as it evolved to. It's simply being triggered by something that was built deliberately to exploit it. That is not a flaw in your character. It's a design flaw in the century you happen to live in. So what do you do with an alarm system 100,000 years old, ringing for a threat that was never real? You cannot switch it off. It's wired too deep for that. It will outlive every app, every platform, every device you'll ever own. But you can change what it's listening for. Every time you silence the notification, every time you leave the phone in another room, every time you let the uncertainty pass unanswered, you are not fighting your nature. You are simply declining to feed a lever that was never really about food. Skinner's pigeons never stopped pressing on their own. Someone had to remove the lever. Maybe that's the real question underneath all of this. Not why can't you stop checking your phone, but something older and harder to sit with. How much of what you call choice is actually just the oldest instinct you own, reaching for the nearest thing shaped like danger. Tonight, when your phone buzzes and your hand moves before your mind has caught up, notice that gap. The half second between the impulse and the reach. That gap is the only place you've ever really existed. Everything else, the checking, the scrolling, the reaching, that's just 100,000 years of survival, aimed at nothing at all. The question is what you do with the half second in between.